those of you that don't know me, and I know we have a lot of new city officials here, I'm Tim Flaherty. I've been representing the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities at the Capitol for really 30 years. Now, I worked closely with Representative Paul Marquart, who's our guest speaker today, since he was elected in 2000. He's from the Moorhead area, and it's really, I asked for the chance to introduce him because we've been working so closely together for so many years. Actually, Paul upsets me sometimes, and the first time I kind of got upset with him was when he was, probably, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe, and the metropolitan legislators tend to meet down in St. Paul and make a lot of decisions. Well, the rural legislators are out home where they probably want to be and should be. So I was always asking, where was Paul Marquart when we needed him? I went around the office saying, where was Paul Marquart when we needed him? And so, I don't know, it must have been 8 or 10 years ago, I went up to visit with Paul, and I met him at the Dilworth Glendon Felton High School. He invited me over there, so the answer to where he was teaching senior high students. And I attended one of his classes, and I found he was about as awesome a teacher as you could find, and that matched his awesomeness as a state legislator, really. So I never again said, where is he when we need him, because he is there for the 6 months of the year, but he is off doing good things for our young people, getting them involved in government and having them understand the executive and legislative branches of government. A couple other things you should know about him. He served as a mayor and a council member in Dilworth. He served as the chair of the House Property Tax Division, which is the key committee that deals with local government aid. Much to my dislike, he also chaired the Education Finance Committee instead of being on the Property Tax Division, but that's the way things go there. You don't always get your choices, so I'm overlooking that now. And actually, he did many good things for rural Minnesota in the education finance area. So let me tell you why I like Paul. And for those of you that know me, I do have, there's, at any time in the legislature, there's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 legislators that I really like to work with. And Paul is one of those. And one of the reasons is he really never criticizes me, at least not openly, for being a strong voice for Greater Minnesota. He doesn't really do that, even when I'm criticizing his DFL colleagues or a DFL governor or whatever. And I think the reason for that is he knows that we're kind of an organization based on principle. We're not going to just praise somebody when they're just giving lip service to us. We're not going to sweep things under the rug and just let people get by with bad policy for us. And I think he recognizes that, and for that reason, I really like Paul, because a lot of the legislators, if you don't agree with them, and if you criticize them in the press or whatever, they get mad at you. They get over it, but they do get mad at you for a while. So I think that's one of the key reasons that I like Paul. This next reason is that, and I don't know if he'll touch on this at all, given our topic today, but he engages members of his own party that don't agree with him. I mean, the thing that rural legislators do is they get there, they go have coffee once a week in the morning and talk about the issues among themselves. You know what? It doesn't do any good. It's mostly they agree. It's who goes out and talks with people who disagree with them in their own party. Like, think of Ann Lincheski, who is the tax chair. Think of Jim Dabney, who is the Minneapolis legislator on the tax committee. Well, Paul, he's just a strong advocate with those people. And the other thing is he doesn't bully anybody, but he also doesn't get bullied. He doesn't let himself get intimidated by leadership or tax chairs or anybody. You know, so I think that's the key. He's articulate, proactive, and principled. And if you doubt what I say, we put his speech on the House floor from the last session about that horrible House tax bill that they passed last year in the House. And it's on YouTube, and you can go look at it, and then you can see exactly what I mean. You know, I want to say this because I believe it's true. Many people now credit the coalition for saving local aid, for keeping it there, for not having it eliminated. And I think that's true, but I think what also is true is that we wouldn't have local aid today if it wasn't for Paul Marquart. And you have to understand that there are some people that are so important, some of our few greater Minnesota legislators that step up and not just say things, but actually do things that really protects our communities. And he's one of them. I'm going to end here with a couple things that he's received. He's been speaking to, you know, since 2000, he's probably spoken at 3 or 4 of our conferences, I would guess, and things. And he's received at least 2 awards from us, Legislator of Distinction Awards for the new people. We have an award thing every year, and people that have really stood out. And I went back and I found one from 2005 and 2008. I know it's a long time ago, but it really, what we say then is true about him today. And I'm quoting from this: Representative Marquart used his background as an educator and a former mayor to gain support from his peers to restore $60 million local aid funding. We are grateful for his leadership in rural Minnesota. That was back in 2005. And then in 2008, we said he pushed for a substantial increase in local government aid, even though the state was facing a nearly $1 billion deficit. His work resulted in an LGA increase of $42 million. I'm sure you probably remember when we did that, when you did that, I should say we. So Paul has been the person to go to at the legislature for local government aid. He understands it backwards and frontwards and is the strongest advocate we could possibly have there. So we asked him to come today and talk about local aid. We're at a crossroads on local aid right now, we think, and we asked him to come and talk about it. So, Paul, come on up.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, Tim. And I will say Tim and I go back a number of years. I mean, it's 15 years, and he is absolutely honest in most of what he said there. Not always agreed on things, and there's been times behind closed doors where my staff has heard voices that gets that loud. But one thing about Tim is he is a equal opportunity agitator. I mean, he is absolutely true. And I still remember one time after a session we had a deficit and we had cut money to Health and Human Services. And I remember getting a letter from a long-term care lobby group thanking us for only cutting them so much. And I'm thinking, Tim Flaherty would have never sent a letter like that. And thank goodness he never would. And that's what is so great about this group and why I'm so honored to be able to speak to the coalition today and being asked to talk about local government aid is because the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities is the one group in the state legislature in the 15 years I've been there that exclusively deals with rural Minnesota issues, and they understand the rural Minnesota issues. And I've been on several conference committees where you get towards the end and it's 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm looking at Tim Flaherty and Bradley Peterson. Those are not 2 people you want to look at 4 or 5 in the morning. But the point to be made is they are there. they are there as you make those. They know that when you make those deals towards the end, they happen sometimes at the wee hours of the night. And they are so dedicated. So for all of you members, I want to congratulate you for being part of this voice. And it is an excellent, strong, very credible voice down in St. Paul. I just want to thank all the city officials here for all that you do. And thank you, Mike in Barnesville. I represent Barnesville for joining the coalition. It's great to be here in Alexandria. I used to teach Minnesota history. I don't have that anymore. But as the commissioner mentioned, I used to always talk about the Kensington runestone. And it was in Alexandria, and we'd always talk about that. And also, I always go from Dilworth, of course, to the Twin Cities. Even though the Twin Cities is 240 miles away, and Alexandria is 100 miles away, in everyone's mind, when you leave Fargo-Moorhead, it's the halfway point. And so I've eaten many meals at Perkins and McDonald's and all of these. So thank you so much for inviting me. And it's great that we're talking about local government aid, because I have no doubt, and I know you have no doubt, that that is the most important investment and program of anything in the state for rural Minnesota. It is the heart and soul for our communities. It's the bedrock. And it's the one program that can keep our services top-notch and yet at an affordable cost, which is really, really important. And one thing a lot of people don't understand, it's really the only property tax relief exclusively for businesses. There, homeowners have the property tax refund and the homestead, other things like that. Businesses, that is their property tax relief. And it's huge for rural Minnesota, and it's also one of the few programs where 66% of the dollars, 341 million out of the 519 million, come into rural Minnesota. There's not a lot of programs where we're getting 66% of the dollars. And the important thing is that local government aid doesn't fund city halls. It funds people. It allows our senior citizens to stay in their home. They've raised their family, they lived in their home 45 or 50 years. They want to stay in their home as long as they can. Helps them do that. Helps families have parks for their children, allows them to have a high quality of life, allows them to get to work when there's 6 inches of snow that has hit the ground. It allows our businesses to stay viable. So many times there's an idea that these dollars fund city halls and mayors and council members. It funds your constituents and it funds our constituents. And what really gets me sometimes when people say, we give out this local government aid, but it really doesn't cut property taxes. That's a good one. Really. I like to go back to Sergeant Joe Friday from Dragnet. Just the facts now. And here are the facts. In the 2 years before 13 and 14, when LGA was cut, property taxes statewide went up over $500 million, but on businesses went up $157 million. Up $157 million. 2 years later, in 13 and 14, last session, biennium, when we invested $88 million in local government aid, for the first time in 12 years, property taxes statewide went down. And on businesses in the last 2 years, no one will really tell you this, the property taxes on businesses went down $55 million. Went down $55 million. And I have no doubt it is that investment in local government aid that did that. And, I was talking to some of the area cities, and I wanted to know, what would happen if we didn't have local government aid? So I'm just kind of looking at the numbers. And the city of Hawley, city of about 2,200, their levy is $519,000. They get $611,000 of LGA. So let's assume you lost LGA in Hawley. And let's say you are going to cut half of your LGA loss. You're going to cut services. Hawley, without LGA, would have to cut $300,000 in services and still raise their property taxes 60%, just by going 50-50. The city of Glendon would have to cut $300,000 and raise their taxes 40%. I talked to Mike from the city of Moorhead. They would have to, this is half and half, they would have to cut services $3.6 million and still raise their taxes by about 33%. In my hometown of Dilworth, they have to cut $300,000 and raise it about 20%. Our communities would look very, very, very different without local government aid. It would be a wasteland out there in rural Minnesota without local government aid. It's huge. And I know how you do the budget. I remember back it'd be June or July, you'd wait to see what your certified LGA level is. And boy, this is huge because this is going to be the biggest part of our revenue other than possibly the property tax levy. And then you go out and you're looking at what you need to include in your expenses. Can we afford that new police officer this year? We haven't seal coated our streets in 8 or 9 years. It should be done. Can we do it this year? Our biggest park that we have in our city, the equipment's getting old. Boy, can we do that this year? We should have another maintenance guy to deal with the water and the sewer and all that. And you try to add 1 or 2, and then you go back and plug in that last number, which is your levy. I know how that works. And if you think it's too high what we have, then you go back and whittle away. But that LGA is the foundation where you set all of that. And it's huge. And so that's why when we got to the tax bill this year, I was a little surprised. I mean, we have a $2 billion surplus. $2 billion surplus. And when the tax bill came out in the House, what we saw is a complete elimination of the property taxes on businesses. Now, I agree, we should do that. We should do some of that. Put it up to a certain level that would really benefit rural Minnesota as far as value. But they completely threw that completely out, all the property taxes. And when you fully phase that in over 6 years, it would be a $2 billion cost to the state over a biennium. And $1.3 billion, or about 66% of that property tax relief went to wealthy skyscrapers in the metro. $1.3 billion. There's also basically a one-time $538 million rebate. For the most part, it was one time. 538. We know how these one-time tax cuts go. Let's go back and remember Jesse Ventura. And also, you did have 2 cities in that tax bill that did get property tax relief. The cities of Rogers, fairly wealthy, and the city of Coates, small little wealthy suburban city through fiscal disparity. And even as bad as all that was, the worst part about the tax bill had to deal with local government aid. All right, $2 billion surplus. $2 billion surplus, and we're cutting $84 million in the local government aid. We have a $2.3 billion tax bill. That's basically everything under the sun. And we have an $84 million cut to local government aid. You cannot call yourself a supporter of local government aid as a legislator if you're even cutting 1 dime in LGA when we have a $2 billion surplus. There's just no way. And probably the worst part about all that was the fact that it was this idea that, we support local government aid, but we've got to cut those big cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. Well, first of all, again, you can't call yourself a supporter of LGA if you're cutting 1 dime in these type of financial situations. But second, that philosophy will lead, I'm totally convinced, to the erosion and ultimate demise and elimination of local government aid. And the reason why is because local government aid builds its confidence and its credibility off of the fact that legislators and local officials have total faith that the formula is bipartisan, it's non-political, and it's tax-based and need. There's a connection there. And anytime you make a political football out of a policy-driven program, you are going to hurt the credibility and confidence by legislators. And so when you cut LGA in any city, when you divorce yourself from the formula that, by the way, in 2013, the coalition did a great job. And it was bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans alike, who came up with this formula. When you do away with that, you are hurting the credibility, and you are putting this program in jeopardy for every single rural city in the state. Let me give you some numbers, just as an indication of how this works. I went and looked at the number of senators and House members that are in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. 10 senators, 20 House members. So those are people that all of a sudden are looking at this and saying, they're just totally messing with the system. Then I went and looked at the number of legislators whose hometowns did not receive any local government aid. You can add another 12 senators and at least another 26 House members. So you are up to now 22 senators, that's about a third of the Senate. You're at 46 House members, a third of the House, who either their system is being messed with or they don't get any LG at all. That's a huge critical mass. And it only takes a few more, 12 more in the Senate and 22 more legislators in the House, and you have majorities in both bodies that said, forget the program if we're not. That is serious. And I know some say, oh, it's Chicken Little, the sky is falling. But when you mess with the credibility of that program, you are messing with the viability and the credibility and livelihood, survival of local government aid and of our communities. It's really that simple. And so, as we move on, I hope as we look at that, members need to be educated a little bit, and I'm hoping that that's something all of you will do as we move forward. The property tax levies will be coming out. I would think in a couple weeks, the Department of Revenue is going to release the property tax levies. And what we're going to see is property taxes are going to go up. They're going to go up around the state. And you're going to hear some of the folks, quite frankly, who supported the cuts to LGA are going to be blaming blaming these wide-eyed liberal mayors and city councils around the state for their extravagant spending. That's what you're going to hear. I would suggest that you tell them to fly a kite. And I'm going to go back to Sergeant Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, and here they are. Basically, what drives your budgets are inflation plus growth. And if you take the last 5 years in the state of Minnesota, inflation plus growth is 2.7%. 2.7%. The levies by cities in the last 5 years average 2.2%. That is 18% less than the growth plus inflation. And in fact, in 2012, cities, your levy amount statewide was only 0.9, less than 1%, 0.9, which was the lowest since 1994. And in 2014, it was 1.6%, the second lowest since 1994. So don't take it. Don't let anyone tell you you are the big spenders here. You are less than the inflation and growth. And you are the ones that have to provide the services for your constituents who are my constituents. And let's take a look at the legislature. Then when they say that, have them look at themselves. First of all, this year, we passed the highest budget in the 157-year history of the great state of Minnesota. $41.8 billion. And if you count all the new spending in the next 2 years, it's 6.7%. That's about a 3.3% average of new spending each of the next 2 years. Your levies the last 5 average, 2.2%. The state's spending is 50% higher than what your levies have been. The facts are on your side. And so, don't shy away from this. When these levies come out, I mean, how can you expect when there is not one dime in the local government aid, not one dime into property tax relief, can you come back and criticize cities and local officials for raising property taxes? And you're doing what you can. And so, I mean, the facts, again, are on your side, and, you know, local government aid is the key there. I want to switch gears for just a second, because I want to talk a little bit about the future now, in 2016. It looks like, even after we give a third of the dollars back to the reserve to build up to about $2.2 billion, that we're going to still have probably about $1.1 billion for this current budget cycle. And I think what we need to do is have a rural jobs and economic growth initiative. And I'm going to talk about briefly some of the goals, which I'm going to tell you are going to be very, very familiar to what you've been working with. But I think you start out with making sure that our businesses and our employees and our cities have the funds to be able to offer top-notch services at an affordable cost. Then you make sure every business and employer has the high-speed communication to compete on a state, a national, and a global level. And then you make sure that our businesses out in rural Minnesota have well-trained employees and the housing to house those employees. And then you try to attract new businesses by expanding the amount of money available for new infrastructure. And then I think you also look at the ag community. You know, Moody's reported that this gap, even though the state overall is doing pretty well economically, they have said that this gap between rural Minnesota and the metro is growing. And they said if we don't do something to fight that, we could very well head back into this great recession we just had. And so what would that look like? I think we take $275 million. That's only 25% of what we're looking at for this budget surplus. And a strong rural Minnesota means a strong Minnesota. And that's something as all of us legislators have to tell our metro folk. I think the $45.5 million that the coalition has fought very hard for, that should be in the books. That is only 2.3% out of this 1.1. 2.3%. Local government aid is only 2.5% of our entire budget. And yet, as we all know, it's the most important thing we have. Then I think we put in $100 million into rural broadband. And the coalition has been a fantastic push. All of you have been a fantastic push for this. The facts are simple. 94% of the households in the metro area have the minimum speed for internet. In rural Minnesota, it's only 61%. With electricity, and we had that gap, there would be a crisis. People would be up in arms. And yet we know that broadband is not a luxury. It's essential for our families to have high quality of life, for our businesses to be able to compete on a state and national global level, and just for our students to do their homework. You know, there was a case when I've been with Representative Thiessen in Morris and Wilmer and Albert Lee, and what we heard is there's a person in in Herman, 20 miles away from Morris, that his wife was looking for a job, had to go 20 miles to Morris just to get on the internet to be able to apply for jobs. There was a person, I was talking to a mayor in the middle of the state here that owns a business, cannot get onto the internet until after school is done because the bandwidth, I don't quite understand it, is taken up so much that it's so slow he can't get anything done until after 3:30. That is unacceptable in rural Minnesota. There's no reason we should be second-rate citizens out here. And if you talk about economic equalizers, broadband is it. That has to be a top priority, and I know for the coalition that is. Then $55 million into job training and housing tax credits. I think another $25 million into the business development public infrastructure area. And then I think we have to do, and it's sitting in the tax bill, is $50 million on debt service for ag land. Now, ag is a very important part of our economy. So that is something that, and I know the coalition, this is no surprise, I think Tim, all of these you guys have talked about. But we absolutely have to do that. With a huge surplus, there's no reason we can't. So I want to conclude here is that this is a huge year, 2016. We have a choice. We can, well, there's no status quo. So we can move backwards here in rural Minnesota, or we can move forward. The last session, I think we moved backwards, quite frankly, with a huge opportunity. We need to move forward. And I think, and that's nice about the coalition, is that you rely on actions, not words. You can't say you support local government aid and then cut it. You can't say you support local government aid and then try to ruin the credibility of the program. And the thing about it is, it's going to rely on you. You understand the local government aid program and its impact much more than any of us legislators. Much more. And so you should be working from kind of a point of strength in that you know how it really impacts folks. And you know, Harry S. Truman used to say, people think I'm giving them hell, but I'm just telling the truth and it seems like hell. And I think the facts are on your side. And I know as mayors and council members and city administrators and all that, that you're not shy about this. But it is going to be crucial that we have a strong lobbying effort down there to get this message out. And I will team with you, I'll work with you. I have been talking already to my Metro counterparts on this. We have to work across the aisle. The Democrats and Republican legislators have to work together on this. Because this has to do with the future of rural Minnesota, not whether or not you're going to make your political party happy. And so thank you for all you do. This is a huge year, but with a little Harry S. Trumans in all of us, I think we can get the job done. So thank you so much.
Paul said he's got a few more minutes. If we have any questions, ask him about strategy, about local aid. You can see why I'm so happy with Paul. He really does his homework. I didn't dig up any of those facts that he spouted out, and he really touched on something that has bothered me several years now, and that is, we need legislators to stand up and have a vision and a program for Greater Minnesota that say, this is what we need, and fight for it. And that's what I think he was suggesting. And I think that's really important. So why don't we take some questions? Paul, you can just call on people if you want. There's one over here.
Yes, Paul. What was wrong with HR 685? It was a Republican bill by Paul Anderson from Starbucks. Looked great for LGA. Why did their party not want to go forward with it? It was absolutely fabulous start.
Yes, that bill, that was a coalition bill, wasn't it? 45.5 million, yes. And I you know, it certainly got political. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there's something, remember, it was mainly after the first-class cities. Well, there's actually 4 of them, not just 3. But Rochester got left out. So I'm not going to suggest what might be the commonality between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth and not Rochester, but it may have to do with political parties. And so see, that's what really, you know, it's even one thing to cut LGA if you had some, but not with a surplus. But when you divorce the formula, and split that, you know, the tax base versus the need, that's when the whole credibility that's why it's jeopardizing everybody in this state and not just Duluth and Minneapolis.
Was that bill taking away the 84 million from the other 3?
Well, it was heard, but then ultimately in the tax bill, the chair is able to put whatever bills he wants. And he had a choice. He did have that bill, which had all these authors and all the positive testimony. And then he had Representative Quam's bill, which actually I think had no positive testimony and only maybe negative. But that's the one they chose.
Yeah, that one was bad.
So you know, have I been guilty of politics? Yes. But this is, when we're actually putting a whole program and a whole part of the state in jeopardy, then it's, you know, you don't play politics with that in my mind.
I just want to make clear, there was strong bipartisan support for that bill, which the coalition lobbied. We had 7 Republicans, 7 Democrats. I think you might have even been on that bill. And then it basically was just tossed aside. But Paul is in the minority. He couldn't stop it. It's only people in the majority that can stop that and can do the right thing and pass that bill. It has to be the party that's in the majority that picks up that bill. And frankly, we were astonished, baffled and astonished that they went the direction they did. It's so anti-rural. It isn't even funny. Next question here.
Yes, I heard earlier that you understand LGA from the bottom up to the top down. So with that in mind, would you want to take a minute or two and explain the formula?
In general, it tries to equalize tax bases so that I can have the same service in Dilworth or Glendon or Owatonna or wherever as they do in the cities at roughly the same cost of the taxpayer. So that's as, you know, at the time you deal with it, but I can't remember. Sorry.
So anybody else have another question? We must have more questions for him.
We got time for one.
One more question. There's one over here.
Tim Meals, Mayor from Perth, Minnesota. When LGA was first started, so there was like 1 or 2%. Was that a sales tax? Was that correct? Or how was it? My point is, why was that never dedicated and that's stated LGA rather than be able to? This much money comes in, and well, we're not going to put some over here, and the rest will go to LGA. I mean, could that be done, or don't you understand what I'm trying to say?
Well, I know what you're trying to say. Actually, when LGA was first formed back in 1971, I think, it wasn't tied to any funding source. Now, there was a period of time when it was under threat, where they did take 1 or 2 cents of a sales tax and dedicated it. It's called a local government trust fund. You remember that? Didn't last. It lasted about 1 year just so we could get it out. So there's never really been any, except for that one time, there hasn't been any like dedicated revenue source that could fund LGA. And every time somebody brings up a constitutional amendment for something or other to protect something, I bring one up for LGA so that we could have a constitutional amendment for that. We don't, generally as a group here, we don't believe in constitutional amendments to do the budgets. We kind of think maybe the legislature should and governors should do the budgets as opposed to passing tons of constitutional amendments. So that's kind of where we stand on that. But I think we just have to come to grips with the fact that we're going to have to fight for local aid. Well, not every year. For about 8 years there, we had a time when it just increased a couple % every year. There was no big problems with it. And then we hit the recession, and then it became a big problem.
We used to have inflation.
And we used to have inflation in it, which is what we should have, and I think we should put back in there. But so that's really kind of the nutshell history of it. But I don't personally find it to be a problem to go and argue for local government aid out of the general fund. I think we have a strong case I mean, God, if you look at some of the things they spend money on, you think, what the hell? I mean, of course we have a strong case. Sorry, that was an editorial comment I shouldn't make, but anyway, so I think we have a strong case. We just have to go make the case and hold legislators accountable. I just don't understand how these legislators could have voted for that tax bill last year. I mean, it was just so unacceptable. Any last one? Oh, there's one. Just,
Do you think that there is any chance that there would be political will for actually getting an increase every year for a certain kind of cost of living increase for LGA? Or like a 3 or 5 year period or something like that? Is there any possibilities that kind of things we're not having these like
It would be, we've had it a few times, and whenever we go into a deficit, it's one of the first things that always gets cut. I think it needs to be talked about. I really do. I mean, right now our budget is looking really good, and not just in this biennium, but into the future. As long as we don't make unpaid obligations out there, which that current tax bill did, and, fully pays in. So I think there will be some talk about that. I don't know the possibility of how that would work, but it's not like it's something that hasn't been done in the past.
yeah, actually you remember Senator Doug Johnson? Okay, he was the tax chair of the Senate, and we twisted his arm, we, the coalition. So they set a floor at 2%. It would go up by inflation each year, but a floor at 2% and a maximum of 5%. Those were in the days when sometimes inflation was going above that. So, and so during, I'd say it was almost 8-9 years, that was operational. And then, of course, we hit the recession, and then everything was off. But I think we should put it back. The Senate has been resisting it, right?
Yeah.
And I think, so it's a long shot, but I think it's something we need to, we need to address, talk about, hopefully in the next couple of years.
Even if you did it for 3 years, 5 years, something, the number of people who look at it, it would give some relief as far as fighting the battle every year,
We need to change the direction of the House Republicans first. So that's our first job, because right now they're cutting the program. So to talk about inflation with them, we got to get them to the point that they will fund it and not cut it.
Mayor?
Hi, Representative Marquart. Thanks for coming via from the Minji. I know that, I believe in the past, part of the trade-off with LGA was local sales tax had to be remitted to the state. And I know that we have a local option sales tax, so we track how much sales tax is collected in our city. And we send about $25–30 million of local sales tax down, or sales tax from our city that's collected in our city down to the state. And I would say we just want, $3–4 million back to help us run the city. So that's always my argument. The engines in the greater Minnesota, those communities that are all represented here, is what makes a strong state, and that's why LGA is important. Because a strong greater Minnesota makes a strong state.
Yeah.
I think we're out of time now, but I want to
Thank you again.
Representative Marquart again.